There we are. I see the recording is in progress.
Yes, and here we go. Okay, so that was a performance of Kyle Flens, composition by Anthony Green, right? Am I right?
Yes, yeah, the first movement's to a multi-movement solo titled Movements in Movement and Sound.
Mm-hmm.
It was that kind of excellent to start with this. That's the first movement, and it sets the tone, a slight meditation, if you will. Very simple. It implies some movement to show that there will be more movement in the subsequent movements of the piece itself, and also just focus on one sound to kind of gain the attention of the audience. I think it's a very it's an excellent start to the movement, and thus a start to this podcast.
It seems like you really enjoyed the piece. Do you always like when you play something? Do you kind of screen it first before like make sure you like it or something like uh, that it goes with your aesthetics or not? Not always.
Oh, sure. I would say that most pieces that I am either asked to play or that I find and I want to play, I'll always follow through and perform the work at least once. Uh, I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, I'm asked to perform something, either from a presenter or through some sort of ensemble that I'm playing with. And I would say those 2 times out of 10, since I seek out pieces that I thoroughly enjoy playing, uh, that sort of skips the trial period already. Either I skip the trial period myself, or I'm asked to skip the trial period because I'm asked to perform the thing. So there never really is a trial period. And if I do like a piece a lot, I definitely want to play it multiple times, because with each performance, you can kind of deeper into the overall meaning of the piece. You always find some sort of nugget that you wouldn't find from a first performance or a first learning of the piece. So yeah, it would be nice to have a trial period for some projects, just to make sure you want to really dive into the thing. I would say, I don't know, I probably had 1 or 2 trial periods within within my schooling, because within schooling, you want to make sure you can climb that mountain for the first time. My grad school teacher, Greg Beyer, alluded to learning a solo piece of music. He alluded it to climbing a mountain. And when you climb a mountain for the first time, it takes way longer than a seasoned trail goer or a seasoned mountain climber. You know what it takes to climb the mountain, so you can kind of skip the trial period, so to speak. But yeah, no, I haven't thought about trials in a very long time. So excellent question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's unique because I don't think a lot of performers really prioritize doing second performances or third performances or fourth performance, unless it's a piece that's like already gotten thousands of performances. That's really, really established.
By established
Yeah,
composers, usually. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the piece has life.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we've talked about like, oh, like I think it's very common amongst like composers. They talk about like how pieces, most pieces get one performance, or if they have multiple performance, it's definitely by one performer usually, which is great. But it just then they'd rather have like a new piece than do the same piece again. Like I've had performers that have asked me to write multiple pieces, but then play each piece once.
Yeah, I mean, knowing a lot of composers myself, I mean, a lot of my work with Del Niente is primarily with composers, so I sort of have this empathy towards composers more so probably than other musicians. I mean, I don't want to speak on other musicians' experiences, but I say for myself, I have a lot of empathy with composers, and knowing the work they put into something just to have it become a one and done. I could sort of see the dread in a composer's face when they talk about their one and dones, and when it's played more than once, you see the joy and the lightness in composers' faces, and that brings me joy, like this joy feedback loop.
Oh,
So for me, multiple performances of some sort of work, it's worth the performer's effort and the composer's effort as well. So
yeah,
that's my stance on that.
For me too, like I have pieces, especially, I mean, really for quite a while, for at least the last 10 years that I've been writing that like, they're not indeterminate in the way that like Cage is indeterminate, where like you can't recognize the piece. But there are things like there are sounds that are maybe a little bit inconsistent or something that they just won't sound the exact same way every time. And so like I've really enjoyed like that like the experience I've had working with performers like multiple times. You get to hear the piece like you get to see that live, and that it's different every time, and it's not only fun to hear the piece every time, but to like see how the performers like react to the piece being different, because sometimes it's different in ways that they don't necessarily expect, which I think is kind of cool, and sometimes in ways I don't necessarily expect either too. But yeah,
I like
your
it's
sorry, go ahead, GB.
No, that is that I like your attitude. It seems like you're very open, very excited to work with new pieces, with new works, new composers that are out there. Like you don't get that usually from our side. Like at least generally speaking, sometimes it will seem like one feels as a composer a bit bad, you might say, when it's like a burden for the performer. Oh, I have to do this for why reason, etc., etc. But when you see them really get into it and really try to figure out what you were thinking and stuff like that, everything's better. Everything's better. Like
I mean, and we've talked about like that from our experience. We actually feel like percussionists have that attitude more so than any other instruments. I have ideas why, but I'm curious. Like, do you notice that amongst like percussion colleagues that they're usually very open to trying things and new experience and really excitable? If you notice that from your colleagues and have any idea why?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's because the tradition of percussion and concert music, it's extremely young. It's about as young as it's younger. It's younger than the telephone. It's younger than the light bulb. That's the sort of the lineage. You could trace it back to the very beginning, the genesis of the whole thing. So I mean, percussionists naturally are just hungry for more repertoire. It's like the first the first couple of percussion ensemble pieces, you have the rolled on ritmicas, and then you have Varèse's ionization that happened around the same time.
Yeah.
Anything before that is just percussion as icing on the cake in an orchestra, and then some of the earliest percussion solos like works by John Cage, things like that. I mean, anything pre-Cage, rolled on,
Well,
Varese, there is
Cage was like
nothing.
the
So
percussion ensemble. Wasn't he the percussion ensemble inventor? I guess Cage.
well, okay. So there were a couple different people doing this. The ritmicas, those pieces, those were written around the same time as Edgard Varese. So there was something in the water, in three places, so to speak. I mean, Cage also had the idea of this sort of percussion ensemble because when it was him, it was who else was hanging out with Cage a lot? You had Alan Havanis. You had one or two others right now. I'll have to look them up. But anyways, you have those collection of people, all in California and the West Coast. They all wanted to play each other's music, and the easiest solution to that was to play it themselves. And the easiest way to do that was with percussion. There was no learning curve of some kind of technique that you had to develop. It's like Cage wasn't trying to learn to play the trumpet or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was just easy to just take them out and go play the thing, right? So naturally, for that collective of composers, the idea of a percussion ensemble was an easy way for composers to sort of share ideas with each other and perform together. Yeah. Shoot, I want to remember the third one. We have Cage, we have Havanis, and then oh man, so Third Coast just played the violin concerto. It's 5 percussionists and violin.
I know I saw that. I didn't see the piece, but I saw the advertisements for the piece.
Yeah, I'm looking this up right now because I'm giving myself,
Yeah, it's interesting because like my main instrument is French horn, and French horn is, I think, in general, there's a couple oddballs, and I'm sure like some of them, and like that are of interest, but they're oddballs from the horn community. They're not like that. Most of them are very conservative, and I would say horn does have physical music written of much older tradition, but not good music. Except for, I think we have a great role in the orchestra. Like we have really good parts in the orchestra from like Mozart on, really, but solo and ensemble repertoire, the body of work isn't there, but you don't see very many players that excited to search for that. So I don't know.
Lou Harrison's the third composer. So Lou Harrison, Alan Havanis, John Cage, they were all sort of sharing music with each other and sort of growing from that. And then rolled on ritmicas. Those were I'm trying to think. Yeah, Amadeo rolled on. That was in Cuba. So there was something in the water in Cuba. There was something in the water in Paris, and then there was something in the water along the West Coast that sort of had this. They had sort of the same idea at the same time to create the sort of percussion ensemble in concert music.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Anything before that is, I mean, personally speaking, I don't find myself a whole lot of joy, waiting, 20 measures to play that one cymbal crash and then to sit down for another 5-10 minutes, something like that. I sort of want to feel integrated into the ensemble instead of just these little moments here and there. So there it is. That explains my hunger for contemporary music.
What drew you to percussion? Was it like contemporary music or was it something else?
Oh, sure. It's sort of my story into percussion was that my dad was a drummer. Okay. He still sort of is a drummer now, only that he he'll go down in the basement and play every once in a while, just as sort of a remembrance of olden times. So I can probably confidently say that he used to be a drummer. He might correct me on that, but we'll see. So I grew up with my dad, playing the drums in a bunch of cover rock bands until he became a software programmer. I started twinkling around on my neighbor's piano, which led to my parents taking me to piano lessons. And I sort of kept up. I kept up drums. I kept up piano in elementary, middle, high school. Every single grade school I went to, there was always a lack of percussionists, and they sort of knew my dad was a drummer. Maybe I was tapping on things. I have no idea. They sort of knew that was the right thing for me, so they put me in the percussion section. I never really thought anything of that. I was practicing a lot of solo piano because I really enjoyed playing piano recitals. I was very introverted as a kid. But then when I went to college and it was time to sort of pick a thing, I mean, that's one of these things, depending on where you go. My undergrad at Towson University was still sort of imitating the conservatory model, where you have to pick a thing and specialize in that, be really good at the one thing. So I had a hard time picking the one thing because I liked playing drums, I liked playing piano, and then when I was a music education major for probably like a year or something like that. I was asked to join marching band, and then I saw the front ensemble members playing marimba with four mallets, and I just I oftentimes I would just stare at the marimbas, and then the drumline instructor would have to sort of snap me back into focus. And I was just kind of like amazed at that. It was like, how do I do that? And then I learned that there was like percussion studies at a university. I was like, oh, this is everything that I love. I love the pianistic, sort of approach to music. I love hitting stuff, and that was kind of like everything combined, and that sort of opened the door to percussion, and I haven't looked back since.
And yeah, you kind of have multiple instruments literally to play with that. Let's say you can say that percussion is the most eclectic instrument of them all, right?
Matches a very eclectic person, so there you go. It was meant to be.
For a very eclectic person, yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, sometimes like I'm sure you've had experience with like, sometimes you have to literally go find new instruments and or seek directions from composers and try to figure out how to make that sound. Yeah. Do you have any like experience like making instruments out of like found objects or?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I would say that it's percussion. The idea of eclecticism and having a bunch of instruments to play is a double-edged sword. It's fun in that you're never bored with one single instrument, but then on the other side, you do need to obtain a pretty massive collection of things to be at your disposal at all times.
Yeah.
Sometimes my wallet does not enjoy that. But then also you hear about, flute colleagues or cello colleagues and how expensive their instrument is and maintenance costs, and it sort of works out in the wash. But in terms of finding instruments and building instruments, I would say I more or less modify instruments, or I modify sounds that already exist in the world. Found instruments, you could find something around you that sounds good, and oftentimes that has been thought about by the composer. And normally those things are easy to find. I mean, we're thinking about like glass bowls, metal bowls, let me think, different kinds of rocks, things like that, natural objects and household objects. Those are essentially just found sounds that can fit within some sort of, composer's goal. And with building instruments, I find myself building wood slats that are tuned. I find myself
from like raw material from like Home Depot or something, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Chris Cerrone comes to mind. There's this percussion solo that I played in grad school where the percussionist is asked to build a scale with wooden slats, and it was sort of a fun project. I was really good at a chisel through that. I learned a very valuable skill of chiseling wood because, of course, when you cut the wood slat, it's hard to tell what pitch that's going to be because of densities of wood. Obviously, the more dense, the higher the pitch, the less dense, the lower the pitch. So in order to fine tune the piece of wood without chopping off ends, you of course can chop off the ends of the board. But then if you go too far, then you mess up. So then to fix that, I mean, you just look at a marimba bar. You see that it's chiseled from underneath, and then in the middle it's very thin. So essentially you're lengthening the board by chiseling out from the middle, and that also focuses the fundamental too within the board. Because with it, when you have a board, you have nodal points, and when you cut that out, it moves the nodal points. There are interesting ways to tune pieces of wood that, I mean, I never thought about it until Chris Cerrone asked, "Hey, tune these like 16 slats of wood," and there it is. That's been a good experience. What else? I cut different lengths of pipe. A lot of these main instruments usually have some sort of goal for a definite pitch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Like,
Yeah.
most of the time sounds. When I build a thing, normally it's to I don't know, hone a specific pitch on some kind of material, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, then you have to figure out how to use them. Like how much do like composers usually play a part in like the setup, or do you have to like figure that out?
Oh, sure. Yeah. A lot of the times I'll let the composer figure out the setup. With that, the composer might have some sort of sound world already in their brains. And from my perspective, I enjoy seeing that inspiration, because that inspiration will usually lead to something creative rather than limiting it to what I already own. Of course, I'll send a composer a list of things that I have, just in case, that person doesn't think about some particular instrument. But I mean, for me, I would say 99% of the time, the composer already has some sort of loose idea in the back of their head. And I find it fun to see where that idea goes. And then if the finished product is too complex, or if I find problems within that, I'll then help to either pare that down or offer alternatives. I mean, with a lot of composers, I'll see like an instrument's played once, but that instrument sometimes sounds like something else, right? I mean, an idea off the top of my head is like, you'll have this moment in a piece where you just scrape a güiro just once. You go, done. It never shows up again. But then you're playing like 5 minutes of vibraphone, and you're like, wow, that's a shame. What sounds like that? And then you look and you go, oh, the resonators underneath. You can go, with resonators, that sounds like a güiro in a way. And if that fits, then there you go. That's one less instrument needed. And I'm happy. The composer's still happy. Everybody's happy. So that's my.
Do you
that's my
usually once you have a set of instruments, when you're working with the composers, do you usually play a role in like how to physically like arrange the instruments?
Oh, totally. Yeah. That's because that for me is 100% practical. The arrangement of the instruments, I mean, of course, it's going to depend on the player, and different players are going to have different schools of thought on how to organize instruments, things like that. Usually when collaborating with a composer, I'll sort of indoctrinate like my school of thought with how to organize things, and then how to put that into the notation. Because then I can read it and learn it faster if it's sort of set up in some sort of way that like communicates with my brain. I mean, an example of this is there's a very famous percussion ensemble piece, Trio per Uno by Nebojša Zivkovic. I coached Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra a few days ago, and probably to the composer's mind, the way the instruments were organized and the way the notation was organized probably made sense for them. But when I saw it, it looked like, I don't know, it looked like hieroglyphics. And I wanted certain instruments to go in certain places. And that for me was extremely frustrating. So oftentimes when that does happen, there's already a pre-existing piece of music. I can't go change it. I'll color code depending on the instrument type or whatever color speaks to me. I mean, I don't have synesthesia or
Yeah.
synesthesia or anything like that, but I'll just say like, okay, I'm at the setup now. Wow, this is awkward. Let's pick green for drums, red for wood blocks, blue for cymbals. I'll color code the score, and at least my brain can easily associate things faster. But of course, that only works if you're not colorblind. If you're colorblind, I guess maybe some sort of shapes might come into play.
I don't think most people are
like
like totally colorblind though. Most people, I think red-green colorblind is the most common one.
Oh, sure, yeah, where they're both brown. Yeah.
So you just have to pick your colors carefully. If you're colorblind.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, colors are shapes. I mean, anything, X note heads.
Yeah.
You know, any sort of way of like, you know, differentiating the classification of instruments. The score only has X note heads on these Chinese opera gongs, and everything else is a normal note head. But it's not organized sonically. You know how like on a piano scale, I mean, this is my selling point for my my sort of school of thought, so to speak. So if people like it, that's great. I'm glad that you like it. If not, whatever, don't listen to me. I like to think of a percussion score like a piano score where the higher sounding notes are higher on the staff and the lower sounding notes are lower on the staff.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
It makes a whole lot of sense to me. Sometimes that doesn't happen, right?
I would think naturally it should be high to low plus by like type at least between like metal, wood, mallet, has skins. You know?
Oh, sure, yeah, that makes sense.
I will say so too. Can you speak a bit more about what you mean by school of thought? Is it only about the arrangement and the notation? What would other school of thoughts entail?
Oh, sure. Well, for that, so
because it's the first time I'm hearing this, so I'm really curious. Like you say, like a percussion performance is relatively new. Like we can go back like 100 years, and I think that's a point of convergence between so-called avant-garde composers and percussionists, because we are kind of looking for those sounds that are new, that pique our ears, that are not common and stuff like that. I think that you're making me think about that. Like, why do we sympathize so much on a theoretical level, but that thing of school of thought that piqued my ear? So can you elaborate on that a bit?
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So I was thinking about school of thought while you're explaining that, because I mean, you know, it's for me, it's just the way things work, you know, personally speaking. So I don't know if I get to reflect on this. So this is a fun opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to, you know, think through this once more. So essentially, I mean, schools of thought, they generally draw to certain players, and some of these players are still living. My teacher's teacher, Stephen Schick, is one of the greatest percussionists in the world, you know, in my opinion. And through all of his numerous collaborations with composers and all of his performances, etc., he sort of found systems that worked for him, and therefore worked for my teacher, Greg Beyer, and then worked for myself, Kyle Flens. So essentially, it's like I could trace it to my grant teacher. That's what I meant by school of thought. And you know, I naturally gravitated towards Greg as a teacher because things that he said just make sense. And then I read Steve Schick's book, The Percussionist Art, Same Bed, Different Dreams. All of that made sense. You know, I didn't, there was no learning curve for that. So for me, I naturally went towards that school of thought. And really what it is, it's all about organization of things sonically, and then also the organization of instruments based on how your body moves. There are a couple hacks in there, and I definitely encourage anyone hearing this podcast to go check out that book. It's a wonderful read. It's like a narrative slash self-biography slash encyclopedia. It's a very fun 3-for-1 kind of book.
What's the
And
title again?
it's called The Percussionist's Art, Same Bed, Different Dreams by Steve Schick.
Okay, there you go.
I enjoy hearing all the frogs where you are, Juan. That's very nice.
Yeah. Everyone can listen to them when we are on the podcast.
Apparently, he says they're like are they like a bird or a frog? No, they're frogs.
They are like small frogs, you might say.
Frogs, yeah.
They can only survive in Puerto Rico for some reason. They tried like exporting them to Hawaii and stuff like that, and they don't survive. They are called coquis.
Mm.
And it's like coquis because of the sound they make. Coquis.
You got to use them for a piece.
You're gonna make me think about what kind of instrument sounds like a coquille, and then we'll talk after that.
Stephen Schick. So that was your teacher's teacher.
Yes. Yeah. And so many of those techniques for problem solving really resonated with me. So then I stuck to those problem solving strategies. I mean, they work logically for me, and I mean, different performers and different teachers, have different ways of thinking about, instruments based on their classification. My undergrad teacher's teacher, Michael Udow, he thought of organizing instruments like a keyboard, and with that, the instruments were never seen as different classifications. It was just more of a subjective organization of lowest pitch to highest pitch, and then sort of organizing it on like a percussion keyboard. There's a really great percussion quartet by Michael Udow. I'm going to look it up now. That's the other school of percussion thought, essentially. It was this wonderful percussionist and composer, Michael Udow, who was at University of Michigan for a really long time. And you could see Michael Udow's influence on a bunch of percussionists throughout the U.S. and in Central America as well. So you have Michael Udow, you have your Stephen Schicks, all these sort of these pioneers of how to think about percussion performance and what that is. I'm looking up the quartet right now. And what it's called, because Timbrack Quartet. So it's this piece, Timbrack quartet. And this piece is interesting in that it's a bunch of tiny instruments laid out like a keyboard itself. And what he was able to do was create complexity that was easy to read for a percussionist. Yes, Timbrack Quartet. It's a wonderful piece, and that blew my mind in undergrad. When my undergraduate teacher Patrick Roulette had us all play this piece because he played it, when he was a student. It's like this like almost pedagogical tool. This moment, right? All these tiny instruments, they weren't organized by instrument type. It wasn't like your woods, your metals, or skins. It was what sounds the lowest to what sounds the highest. And they were all arranged like a little keyboard, and the music notation was set up like keyboard notation, right? Like your F sharp was a clave because the clave was put where the F sharp was. And then, the C was like, a tiny little Brazilian tamborim because it sounded like higher than this clave, Or, no, you know what? That was stupid. I'm sorry. That's the other way around. The tamborim was definitely the F sharp, clave was the higher C, right? So when you saw that, it just made sense. You sort of heard the melody and the gesture within these percussion noises, and I don't know. I was forever changed once I performed that piece and learned about that. I was like, things weren't the same. But then with the Steve Schick school, sort of organizing the instruments was depending on how your body moved. So, you had your drums here, and then your keyboard was here, and then your higher instruments were here. Sonically speaking, that makes sense. The keyboard's in the center because, that's sort of like the center of focus. And then lower sounding things were all of your drums to the performer's left. And then higher things like wood blocks, crotales, and such were off to the right. And if you think about that, it's like, oh, the highest sonic thing that's the high end of the piano and the low end of the piano, right? It's just, it's your intuition goes, oh, lower to the left, and you don't have to think about it past that. So I don't know. Those are two schools of thought that
You're
I'm
making
throwing out there.
about a percussion duo and how the percussion professor over at UB helped me
Yeah.
set it up.
Counselor, yeah.
Can I show you the score, the setup? So
Yeah, totally.
what you think about it? Okay, so here we go. Like here, the excess will be the performer. It's a percussion duo. Here will be performer 1, performer 2, the audience over here. So, up drums, tempo blocks, marimba first, closers here. I don't know if you will set it up that way or set it up in another way.
Oh, totally.
The station 1 kind of looks a lot like, to me, what like Hal described with the small things to the right of the
player and the lowest instrument toward the left.
Oh yeah, totally.
And also the marimba
makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
There it is. That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's funny. I actually a hack that I do is I stick the crotales in line with the vibraphone on the high register, so that way I don't have to look off to the side. Because the playing zone for the crotales are so sensitive that I would like to have it like as close to me as possible, instead of in my periphery. But other than that, I mean, I honestly would set things up just like this. So there it is. My school of thought has been confirmed.
Pretty cool.
It'd be interesting. I wonder if Tom Kriller, who is the teacher there, if he has a similar teacher, maybe has a similar ancestors of his teachers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Tom Kriller.
He studied at Juilliard. I know that, but.
Well, yeah. So Tom Kriller, the whole Juilliard. Oh yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, because that's a
like Taljean.
Yeah, that whole Juilliard school. I mean, that came from timpani playing, and the idea is a lot of very old percussion teachers. If you trace back a couple generations, were all timpanists, and the timpani players thought a heck of a lot more about sound than other percussionists. I could say this without any repercussion because I believe it to be true. Timpanists, I mean, they're often thinking about mallet choices. They're thinking about where they're playing in the drum. That sort of focus on sound, I think, translates a lot to, a lot of percussionists today. We're thinking about sound way more than a couple decades ago. A couple decades ago, you wouldn't dare play a marimba mallet somewhere else. Marimba mallet was meant for a marimba. And then you're supposed to buy this vibraphone mallet that's supposed to be played on vibraphone. And now it's all just about like, what color are we talking about here? It's like none of those rules really apply anymore. It's all about like the material and what kind of color you have. And I really think that derives from like all these timpanists really digging into what their sound was. So I don't know.
Yeah, but also maybe makes me think how the composer have developed throughout the last century too, because we have kind of push a bit of the pitch aspect to the side and thinking more and more about the sound itself and sound production and timbre and durations and stuff like that. It's kind of like I'm seeing the compatibility more and more. Like me and Megan have discussed this in the past, the compatibility between percussionists, particularly percussionists and composers, how it's easier to work with percussionists than any other performer, always, all of the time, at least 99% of the time. And it's kind of like I'm seeing the points of meeting points, the points of convergence there, here and there. How you think about music in many ways is not that different of how we sometimes talk and think about music. Yeah. Oh, so that's pretty cool, I think. Just
I love the similarities. It's
speaking
wonderful.
out loud here. Speaking out loud here.
Yeah.
So
Excellent
when you're
times.
collaborating with somebody, like how does it come to be? How does a collaboration comes into being? Like,
Oh,
is
sure.
it from just speaking friend to a friend of a friend, or do you listen to some composers and do you approach them? Do they approach you? I know that you are in two ensembles, right? You are
Hmm.
in Dal Niente and you are in the uh, Flanau. Is am I
Yep,
Flanau?
Flanow duo. That's
Flanau
it.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, with collaborating, oftentimes it's an organic sort of emergence. It feels like an organic friendship has been made. Um, Either like a composer will approach me or I'll approach the composer. Um, in this case, a majority of my collaborations that has led to new pieces of music and premieres are all through uh, sort of the scene. We'll go to a concert and will we or myself, I'm speaking we now because you mentioned Flanow Duo, and I'm thinking about my dear friend and collaborator Jonathan Hanau. We'll go to a concert, and when we see some sort of piece by a composer, or we'll meet a composer at some sort of concert or venue, things like that. We'll always keep everyone in the back of our minds, and then whenever any sort of opportunity either presents itself to us or to a composer, that's when the sort of real approach or the real ask comes into play, to write some sort of piece. And with that, I find myself being the yes man more of the time because I always find joy in some sort of collaboration. So if any of this ever happens, I always say yes because I find collaborations to be wonderful. And with that, oftentimes the within the collaboration sort of asks, is this the right time for this? Is this the right place for this? Um, Jonathan and myself in Flano Duo, we have a lot of things cooking right now, and we're finding ourselves needing to play more and find more opportunities to perform to then meet all the demands of the collaborations, which is an excellent problem to have. I would say if we had like a series of concerts in the works, then we would have the opposite problem. We would want to change up our repertoire so that people hear new sounds and hear fresh music. So then we would then approach more composers to then collaborate to then meet the concert, right? There's the ingredients in the soup, so to speak. Like, you have the venues, you have the concerts, you have the composers, that sort of thing. Sort of leads to various wants and needs for collaboration. But I don't know, any sort of collaboration that I've ever been a part of is usually organic. There's I've been a part of one or two consortiums, but with that, for me, of course, I'm very fortunate to live in Chicago, where there's this huge abundance of art and music and people. Um, Oftentimes with consortiums, that sort of collaboration, you see it from afar. You see the collaboration happening, and you can always put in your 2 cents, but it's never really that organic. Of course, consortiums are great because people need to make a living, and that sort of thing is good, especially if the project is of a large scale. Um, in terms of collaborations, I really enjoy the sort of organic, uh, meeting of people. You sort of talk about their ideas, they hear about your ideas. If that sort of creates a very specific or focused idea, I always think that focus is what inspires the collaboration itself. I mean, an example of this is when Flano duo, Jonathan and myself, we collaborated with this Chicago composer, Jack Langdon, to create a piece for one of our concerts back in September. And we, through some sort of maybe post-concert hang or, some restaurant or bar someplace, we're always talking with everyone, we're hanging out, we're talking about ideas and things like that. And Jack started talking about, what was it? I don't know. He was talking about quarter tones, and I was telling him how I found some way to make a quarter tone in a vibraphone. And then he started talking about humor in music. We were at some concert where there was some piece with humor in theater, and Jonathan's like, "Oh man, yeah, I love theater and music. I haven't composed a piece that had theater and humor in so long. Man, if only there was a way to do this." I mean, we weren't like kind of fishing for things, but Jonathan talking about theater, Jack talking about sort of meditative, quiet music, and then me talking about quarter tones. Those three finite ideas inspired Jack himself to think, "Oh, you know what? I have an idea for a piece. What if it has, this, and that?" It had all three elements. There was some sort of humor in the. It's funny. I'll just have people look it up. I'll have to share like a video with y'all later of this piece. Right now, it's just on Constellation's website, but the piece it relies on uncomfortable silences to create humor, and Jack's very good with creating enough space to where people are uncomfortable, but at a sort of humorous level. Not at like an actual anxiety level, but there'll be little moments, tiny moments here and there, and then I'll play some sort of funky quarter tone bit, and then there's silence. And then there's another small idea, another quarter tone bit, more silence. And then there's time to kind of like ruminate and think about these strange sounds that just happened. And I don't know, it's just it was a very enjoyable collaboration. I love the piece. Jonathan loves the piece. We think it is a huge success, but I don't know, those three finite ideas and some way of bringing them together was a good challenge for Jack, and what I think created a really lovely piece of music. So there it is. That's my sort of take on collaborations, if you will.
How you describe it? Sorry.
I was gonna say, how much do you work with how in the collaboration how much do you like to work with the composers as they're writing the piece versus just being handed it at the very end?
If it's handed at the very end without anything, oftentimes I'm a little anxious because if something doesn't work out, that idea has been sitting there for a long time enough where it becomes reality, and I don't want to crush that reality for whoever's making it. So for me, I love workshops. Because that's the time we can go in the sandbox. If some idea doesn't work out, at least we know it doesn't work out before it's actually in the piece, without the imagination sort of running wild. Because oftentimes it's like, I mean, I'm spoiled in that regard, because if my imagination runs wild, I go to the practice room or I go to my music studio and I try it. And if it doesn't work, I go, "Oh shoot, it doesn't work. Move on." But then if I don't have access to that stuff, I would imagine for a composer, they're like, "I hope this works. Let's put it in there." And then months later, when it doesn't work, it's disappointing for everyone. So
right. And not everybody, especially like I teach composition, and a lot of like to young composers, and a lot of like especially young composers, but at all levels, like they don't really understand the physical nature of percussion and they put all these different instruments and sounds together without actually thinking, "Oh, is it possible to go from all these different sounds in the time I've constricted?" And that doesn't even naturally occur to a lot of the young composers to even think about. Yes, that's
I
it's
really
different
yeah.
because it's way
what
much more physical, I think, than a lot of other instruments.
Yes, it is 100%.
Yeah.
I like the way you described the piece from your friend Jack. Was it
Yeah, Jack Langdon.
Jack Lyndon? I would like to listen to it because it's very hard to project humor in a successful way, music just through music. Uh, and the way you describe it, it seems like he was able to do it in a very successful and organic way. That takes me to another point I wanted to bring out. Like you like to work in an organic way, like organically, with the
Mhm.
composers and with the setups and all of this. It's like we are going back to a tradition of not just the composer being this dictator that kind of like gives you the score and tells you this must be played like this and like this and like this. No, it's more like a going back and forth, and that's what really is supposed to be about all of this. We're kind of like uh, new music composers, so-called new music composers. We're just as experimental, as experimenting, as scientists, you must say, scientists
Mhm.
thinking as any performer that comes that is confronted with a new music score and it's just
Mhm.
and like new notation and stuff like that. And the way your approach towards it and towards new pieces and how to commission them, so to speak,
Mhm.
I really like it because it's kind of like it's just from the ground up. Okay, your idea, my idea, let's build something. And
Yep.
everybody has something to collaborate. And the end result is organic because the process itself was organic. I really like that. Really enjoyed that.
Awesome.
Uh,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, with that also that comes a lot of vulnerability as well. That's the thing to think about because I mean, if ideas don't work out or say like some idea changes at some sort of point, I mean that's a sort of vulnerable experience, right? Because with that, things get pretty messy, and oftentimes there's this sort of frontier and there's this sort of fear in that too. So I would say there's a lot of fear and vulnerability in there too. This sort of goes this piggybacks of what you were saying, Megan, about young composers not knowing the physicality of it,
Mhm.
and this also goes to your comment, Juan, about composers wanting to go off and sort of like they go off to like Frankenstein's lab hidden up in the mountains somewhere, and they want to like craft this thing. They want that space to be vulnerable, but then
Mhm.
sharing that vulnerability in a space together, that definitely takes a lot of patience, right? I
Also
mean,
honesty, because
yeah.
if you
Mhm.
Oh,
dedicate
100%.
hours and hours and into something and then just to find out it doesn't work and have to scrap it, just
Yeah.
throw it in the trash, like 50 hours of work to the garbage.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a
Very
collaboration I
honest
did
with
with oh right. Oh yeah, one of the collaborations I did with Luis Fernando Amaya. I wrote this piece for percussion and guitar with one of my colleagues, Jesse Langen. Um, Not to be confused with Jack Langdon, Jesse Langin. No D's, a bunch of similar names. Sorry about that. But at the piece with Jesse Langen and Luis Fernando Amaya, we were Luis and I we were really stuck on trying to find sustained sounds that a percussionist can make, because of course it's easy to bow something, um but we're talking about active sustain. We're not talking about a self-activating sustain like a cymbal hit or something like that. We're talking about bowing something or like rubbing something with a super ball, any sort of thing where like the percussionist actively creates sustain through something. I was sort of, I enjoyed making those sounds a lot, and that was my contribution. That was my thing thrown into the sandbox, right? We were all hanging out in the sandbox, and what I threw in the sandbox was sustained sounds, and Luis's idea thrown into the sandbox was imaginary animal noises. And with those two, sort of desires, or those two sort of toys in the sandbox, we were trying to figure out what works with both of those, both of those requests. And I remember a lot of days where the two of us would just kind of be sitting there in my studio looking at things, being like, what do we do? Like, what else do we try? Like, I don't, like, nothing's cutting it. And I'm like talking about superballing this, superballing that. And it's like, no, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. And we're just sitting here like, we're like sitting on the floor at this point, just kind of staring at stuff. And I looked at it. I saw there's a contact microphone. Perfect. Wonderful composer, Luis Fernando Amaya, one of my faves. And we're sitting there out like on the floor, and we're thinking about what else to superball, because we're stuck to like what superball sound speaks to him. And it was the funniest thing. We're like, there's this tile, this giant like ceramic tile that I have, and we superball it. And Luis goes, I love that sound. That's it. But it's not loud enough. And I go, no, I don't want to, like, not again. But then I remember that I was cleaning up the Down the Inte space, and I came across a bunch of contact microphones. And my desperate brain just went, okay, hear me out. I stuck a contact microphone on it. I put it into a speaker, but the speaker, it was one of Jesse's amps that was lying around at the time. And it had a like a very, very wet reverb sound preset on the amp. I didn't know it, but then we plugged it in. I did the superball, and not only did it pick up the lows, it had this crazy reverb that lasted like 10 seconds. And it just went, whoa. And my eyes went really big. Luis's eyes went really big, and we went, that's it. And then we found it. So it took way too long to find this thing. But once we found it, we were like patting ourselves in the back, because we're like, we found the thing that's like
worth it.
It was essentially the glue that held the piece together. And I'm still very proud of that moment. But that created a lot of vulnerability, a lot of frustration, man. I'll tell you, it was something else. So there it is.
Would be really cool. Do you plan on you have all of these pieces? Do you have any plans on releasing them commercially or something? It would
Like recording?
like a recording with all these
Oh,
computers, because it would be a really cool project, I think.
Oh, I mean, that would be lovely. Yeah, that's a thing. I have so many irons in different fires. I was taught to not keep all of your eggs in one basket, so I have like 3 albums that are half finished. Okay. Maybe it might make sense to just stick them all together and find some common theme or something, because that'll at least create some sort of momentum in the release of these recordings. Because I do have all these pieces recorded. It's just a matter of like, sticking them all to one thing, or maybe even creating singles or some sort of online release. Yeah, I'll be thinking about that. That's some good inspiration. Thank you.
I think they should come out. They should be out there for people to listen, and some of this seem to be like for watching, to have the whole experience.
Absolutely, yeah, the videos and things like that. Yeah, that's a lovely thing too, I guess, with sort of releasing things online, is you can always release a video. You could just extrapolate the audio from the video, and there you go. You have 2 different forms of media to enjoy. So.
Are these all for the Flanao duo, what you were describing?
Oh, sure. The Luis Fernando Amaya piece was not Flanao duo. That was my own
solo
sort of
piece?
Personal collaboration.
Okay.
It's funny. It's like I often had times to think about myself as a soloist, but it always just turns into a duo or a collaboration anyways. I'm not. I like playing solo music, but for me, my newest joy is collaborating in ensemble settings. That's my favorite.
To the Flanao duo, I think it's really nice. Like the timbres you get with percussion on one side and the piano on the other side. It's like I really dig it. It's like a pretty cool idea. I think that I haven't heard of another duo that has that combination.
But it does seem like an instrumentation. Like once you see it, like it seems like an instrumentation that should be like a common instrumentation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
but it's
Yeah.
it's not. But it seems like it makes so much logistical sense. But it's like why isn't there this whole body of work? Yeah.
Well, not whole body of
Yeah.
work, not yet. Not
Yes.
yet.
Not
Yeah,
yet.
right.
Yeah.
It is in the making as we speak.
People can go and listen to it there. If you want, I can play something from Igor Santos.
Oh, please. Yeah, please do that. Yeah, his piece Carve is such a joy. It's such a lovely. I'm playing that. Jonathan and I, that's one of our home runs for collaborations.
I really enjoy that. Let's go. I really enjoy the chemistry between you guys because the composition kind of shows the chemistry in a way. Also, because in the first section you kind of listen to the duo. Okay, here's the pianist, here's the percussionist, and you are
Mhm.
melting well together. But in that middle section, that is more like an automaton, mechanical section. You sound like what
Mhm.
in itself, and it's prolonged, and I really enjoyed that type of music. It really caught my ear like the first time and even now too. Then and then go out with a kind of like go out of that piece with a suspended sound, and then kind of go back to the duo kind of thing, like
Mhm.
back and forth, you might say. Also, I could see that it something. That's why I told you about the videos, the recording video stuff, because you could see the pianist at some points just going over the piano and not sounding the keys, right? So that's a very physical aspect. I wanted to ask about I would ask the composer about what was his intention there. If it was more of a physical thing for people to see or expectation or something like that. But yeah, I really dig it, man. Pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a lovely piece. We enjoy playing that one a whole lot. Yeah, it's a wonderful time, and we really enjoy the sounds. That collaboration was funny. Igor challenged Jonathan and myself to just think about fun ASMR like sounds, and to also think of scraping sounds. Those were like our two. It was like our homework assignment. It's like, okay, we're gonna make this piece. Like, we like Igor's music. Igor's a fan of like us as performers. So then Igor was like, okay, here's homework time. I'm gonna look for these sounds too, but I also want y'all to find this. Give me your like 2 to 3 favorite ASMR sounds that you could do on your instrument, and then find 2 or 3 scrapey sounds. And that was it. So then we're just sitting there. We're like, okay, we'll give ourselves a couple weeks to come up with ideas. And yeah, those were actually most of the ideas we came up with. We just sort of like put them all in the piece. And Igor does a great job of finding similarities in sounds. And pairing them with each other and kind of creating this sort of polyphony and interplay with similar sounds. That's what creates the complexity and the sort of automatron sort of sound in Igor's music, is that if you pair similar sounding things close enough to each other, it encourages this listening of both things as one thing. Because you hear all these similarities and then you're like, oh, that's not a piano or that's not percussion anymore. That's just, it's not red or blue anymore. It's purple. You know what I mean? It's like literally the colors are combining,
Like a mega instrument, a super instrument, or something like that.
Totally. Yes. Yeah, that is 100% of Igor's alley.
Work pretty well also if you are in the audience, specialized, like in a stereo type of way. That would be pretty amazing to hear it that way. I would say that will probably work that way. That will work successfully that way too.
And it seems like in that too, because I've had a chance to see you guys perform a bunch of times, that a lot of times, like John gets to do stuff that's kind of percussive, and sometimes you get to do stuff that is pianistic too.
Oh yes, yeah, that's our bit. Is we often will have each other suffer for the bit, for the humor behind it. It's Jonathan has a piece that's toy piano four hands. Hey Kyle, I really want to play this, and I go, I have to learn piano. Oh great. Oh man, this is a thing, and we'll do that. And then my rebuttal to that was, oh hey John, I went to Seamus and I have this really fun piece for piano and vibraphone. It's not hard. No, it's not difficult. No, and I definitely didn't already learn this and practiced it for weeks on end. It's really easy. I give it to him and he goes, oh God, what have you done? So now we're playing this back and forth, this game of catch where the person catching, it's like a hot potato with barbs on it. One person suffers, we catch, the other person suffers, and we take turns doing that, and it's fun. People get a kick out of it. So there's that. I mean, yeah. But it's funny actually. There were we asked Hannah Barnes to write a piece where Jonathan plays percussion, and that was a rebuttal to me having to learn so much piano music. It was like, hey, where's Jonathan playing the percussion, huh? And so I brought that up to Hannah Barnes, and that was one of her inspiration pieces, or inspiration points for a piece that she wrote for us later on, was that she made Jonathan play Crotales, which was awesome.
Sometimes all the inside of the piano stuff is more percussion than percussion skills are probably more helpful for someone that's not than piano skills. Anyways.
Oh, for sure. Oh no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We'll be talking about be talking about like what card sounds good, or like where to play it on the string, or or like a lift technique instead of like a down technique. It sort of turns into percussion shopland. And then we often find ourselves cueing like percussionists. And then and then all of a sudden we become a percussion duo. That'd be pretty sweet. Jonathan playing percussion. That'd be awesome. But then again, then I'll have to play more piano, right? It's like I don't think it's ever gonna end. We'll just keep doing that for as long as we can.
You can use your setup to set up all the percussion instruments like a piano, with different notes, and then it's like he's playing piano.
Now we're talking. That's a good idea right there. I like that.
Yeah. The whole circle. Pretty awesome.
I wanted to ask, like, my last question to you will be probably, like, how do you compare, since it seems like you've traveled a lot to Latin America, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would you compare the contemporary music scene over there with the US scene?
I would call that, if Stephen Schick's book is Same Bed, Different Dreams, this comparison of the two scenes is same dream, different beds. Oftentimes when I play in Argentina, when I play in Costa Rica, when I play in Brazil, there are a whole lot of similarities than differences. I would say, a lot of the a lot of the similarities outweigh the differences. Um, this one of those questions that y'all sent to me ahead of time. It gave me some time to really think about it, which I appreciated because, yeah, the scenes are extremely similar.
Mhm.
In terms of structure, you have a lot of universities. These non-judgmental zones, we'll call them, where everyone can experiment. There are a lot of universities. There are a lot of conservatories. You have the sort of city culture. I would say, I think what made the two scenes so similar, thinking about things historically, is that um, the whole Western Hemisphere is similar in that there was a lot of influence from Europe. The whole sort of European colonialism, and how much we don't like colonialism and things like that. But then that also came that European influence in in the different countries in the Western Hemisphere, and that sort of created this sort of concert music structure into culture. And with that, then came conservatories and music schools to then uphold that sort of culture and sort of keep that in different countries and their societies, right? So you also can kind of see the similarity in the what do you call it, the divergence from that, right? Of course, I mean there's operas. You have Teatro Cologne, which is like an extremely lovely opera house, and they're playing all sorts of opera productions there. But then each country in Southern America, Central America, North America, um, we will still nod to the culture that was left from Europe, but then we're also sort of looking inward now towards our history and our own cultures from our respective countries, and then creating music based off of that. So that's what I've been finding. Whenever I go play, my most recent international performance was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, right? And um, a lot of premieres that I performed from composers, it felt like the exact same collaboration as in the United States. It was through a foundation. It was tied to a music school, and we played at an experimental hall that was also tied to a classical music hall, and it was just like it was the same exact environment. And for me, it created excellent pieces of music. I would say that the only difference is how each country sort of interpolated the European traditions, and the European influences based off of local culture that was happening at the time, or I mean, even through the transatlantic slave trade, different sections of Africa then had its influence on different countries in the Western Hemisphere, right? Slavery is bad. We don't like slavery. We didn't like the transatlantic slave trade. That was extremely bad. The cultures from those different areas in Africa then planted their roots in various countries in South, Central, North America, and then thus created different melting pots for various musics. Um, I would say that like in Brazil, you especially see that because the 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 slaves brought in from Angola, and those traditions, that you have now the berimbau, which is the Afro-Brazilian musical bow that has deep roots in Afro-Brazilian music culture. And you have all the instruments that are used in samba music, right? That sort of like hyper focus on rhythm, I would say, creates a lot of it just creates like rhythmic abundance in Brazilian culture and Brazilian music. I mean, Igor is a Brazilian American composer, and Igor's music is extremely rhythmic. You see that, I mean, when you're in Brazil, like, kids are learned to play various percussion instruments to join samba groups, right? So there's very percussive elements at play when you think of Brazil. And then when you go to Argentina, that heavy Italian influence, and you have like the bandoneon, and you have the tango, all that sort of stuff. Argentinian music, like contemporary music, is extremely melodic, right? And that goes back to all those influences that was in play in that particular melting pot in that particular country. So I would see everything as one and the same. It's just a different flavor or a different I don't know, it's like the same prism, but you have like different colors coming out of that prism, right? Depending on what angle you're looking at it. There's so many similarities. I mean, I could talk about it for a long time. So yeah, that's my
Yeah.
answer to that. It's exciting, you know. I love all the collaborations that I get to have with, you know, various countries around the Western Hemisphere. It's a lovely time.
I can totally see what you're saying about Argentina because I used to have a composition teacher from there,
Mhm.
and her last name was Italian. Like a lot of
Mm.
the population is Italian descendant. She loves opera, even though her music is kind of like is very forward thinking, very contemporary,
Mm.
and stuff like that. It's like I can totally see that. Well, thanks for the
Yeah, yeah.
answer.
What if
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's just it's like those things that you don't really think about until they're like asked for a podcast and you have like a half an hour car ride on the way home to like ruminate over it and you're like, wait a minute, there's all these dots here. I didn't connect them just yet. But they were all there already. There was a student piece that we played when Del Niente was in Buenos Aires playing with the Contemporary Music Institute through Teatro Cologne. It was Augustina Crespo made this piece Nopera. It was the idea of an anti-opera. It was essentially just like a giant introduction and then an ending without the opera in it. So
Hmm.
it was a lovely concept, and the piece was amazing. I loved playing it, but it was also quite funny too. You hear it, you're like, oh, here's the intro. Oh, here's the end. There was no opera, but all the lyrical themes were there, and the sort of like enveloping of the ideas were there. But then it just ended,
The thing is
and
that
I don't know. That stuck with me a
no
lot. I
opera.
was like, oh, that's cool. That's like an operatic influence.
Yeah, to write something like that, you really have to know opera. Because if you don't know
Yep,
opera, then
yep.
it kind of doesn't work. Like bel canto and all of that stuff. Well, I guess that's it for me
Yeah.
on my side. Do you have any other questions,
No,
Megan?
I mean it was great having you on and talking new music percussion.
Yeah, any closing
Yeah.
statements, Kyle?
Oh, let's see. I'm always hungry for new music and for collaborations. If anyone listening to this podcast is interested, you know, feel free to contact me. Feel free to contact Ensemble Del Niente. There's a website for Ensemble Del Niente where you can contact the group and you can get involved that way. Flano Duo is always hungry for new music. Definitely contact us through our website. We're very easy to get in touch with. We're friendly people. We don't bite. Come talk to us. I love talking new music. So that's my closing
Yeah.
statement.
Very
Pretty
cool.
cool. There's Dal Niente website on the
Excellent.
screen, and then here's Flanau Duo. Well,
Excellent.
Social media, but yeah.
Uh, so I guess that will be it. Thanks for being here, man. And
Yeah,
thanks
thank you so
for
much.
Totally. Thank you
the
so much. I appreciate
conversation. I really needed this. Let's
Yeah.
say
it. Yeah.
that. So be well. Bye.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Take
Thank
care,
you,
everyone.
Kyle. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks. Talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.